Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Disc Podcast. I'm so excited and just honored to be joined today by one of my mentors in the field, a guy I really look up to, Mark Asanovich, former strength coach in the NFL, college level, just one of the all-around nicest guys I've ever had the opportunity to meet in our field, and just filled with useful information. So not a PhD, not our normal guest here, but I would argue more of a practical researcher than maybe anybody we've ever had on the podcast before. You know, most people look up to athletes, they look up to Division I players and professional players as the standard of what you want to look to for sports and athletic ability. And Mark has seen it all. So, Mark, please introduce yourself. I'd love to let everyone get to know a little bit about you.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, Logan. I'm a big fan of the podcast and a lot of good information, so it's an honor to be on. As you said, I've been a strength coach, fortunate to be at every level. Started at the high school level and actually started my strength career at the college level at The Ohio State University. And while I was there, met a lot of mentors and tremendous strength coaches, and then was fortunate enough to go on from there to the Citadel, where I was the first strength coach at the Citadel down Charleston, South Carolina. Had an opportunity to come back to Minnesota. So I was at Anoka High School for 10 years. And while I was there for 9 of the years, I was volunteering with the Minnesota Vikings when Dennis Green was the head coach and Steve Wetzel was the head strength coach, and was fortunate enough to get the assistant job with the Vikings for 1 year, and then was able to follow Tony Dungy down to Tampa. We were there for 7 years. Went from there to the Baltimore Ravens. From there, I went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, finished my professional football career in the UFL with the Hartford Colonials, and am now teaching in a public school in Minneapolis.
Yeah, Mark has been all over the place. And for anybody who knows anything about the strength and conditioning field, his list of universities and professional teams he's been with is actually quite short compared to a lot of guys, which means he's been relatively successful at those locations to be able to stay in some places. Would you say with the Bucs for 7 years? Another place, I think you mentioned 5 years. So that's a long time in a win or go home kind of level of athleticism in D1 and professional football. So Mark knows what he's talking about. He's currently an adjunct professor at St. Cloud State University, and also has his own facility out of his garage gym, which I would highly recommend any of our listeners that are in the Minnesota area if he's got the time. You're in Minnetonka, right? Is that correct?
Just west of Minnetonka and Victoria.
And I don't want you to get overwhelmed with people trying to knock down your garage door, literally. But if you do have the opportunity to check out Pro Pumped, I would 100% recommend you reach out to Mark and try to check that. Mark, I wanted to have you on because you gave a fantastic presentation at our resistance exercise conference in 2023 in Minnesota about the 5 Ps of strength training, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But I'd just love for you to educate our listeners a little bit about your experience in the college and professional ranks, and talk to us a little bit from your view about the current state of strength and conditioning as a profession. You can just take that where you will.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Logan, because I think in order to understand where we are, you have to understand where we've been. And I've just been fortunate to grow up with the profession. It was really, really our profession's only about 50 years old. Prior to that time, coaches told their athletes, do not lift weights because of a number of misconceptions they had. One was bulking up, the translation being, if you put on muscle mass, you will slow down. Being muscle bound was another myth, meaning that you would lose flexibility. So do not lift weights because you will be slow and stiff. That was the mentality just 50 years ago. In fact, when I grew up, that's what my coaches were telling me, do not lift weights. Things have changed since then. And the biggest impetus was in 1970 and 71, the University of Nebraska won back-to-back national football titles. The legendary coach at that time was Billy Devaney, and he was also the athletic director. But he was cut in the cloth of that era. He did not like his players' strength training. But being the athletic director at the University of Nebraska, he was under pressure from some of his younger coaches who were at that time asking him if they could build a weight room and then put somebody in there that could teach their athletes how to do it properly. He also had his offensive coordinator, Tom Osborne, on his staff, was encouraging strength training at that time as well. So finally, in 1969, Billy Devaney acquiesced and hired a strength coach. And they had a very small weight room at the time. And the strength coach name was Boyd Epley. He was a former pole vaulter at Nebraska that always kind of had an interest in strength training. And to give you the importance that Billy Devaney put on it, he hired Boyd for, I think it was $2 an hour. And so he really, again, didn't put a lot of importance in it. In fact, he would not allow his starters to train in the weight room because he didn't want his starters to be slow and stiff. Well, he went on to win back-to-back national championships in 1970 and 71. Now, in order to continue to win national championships, you need to recruit the best football talent in the country to your university. And he had a big problem because he had to recruit people to come to Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Lincoln, but it's literally out in the cornfields.
I've heard it's beautiful. To any of our listeners in Lincoln.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is beautiful. If you like cornfields, but they're rolling cornfields. But when you're a recruit and you have a chance to go to Los Angeles or Miami or, one of the Texas schools or the Panhandle or something like that, it's a challenge for those schools. Anybody who's ever been in college athletics know that when it comes to recruiting, if you have something distinctively unique about your university that nobody else has, it gives you a recruiting advantage. And Billy Devaney understood that because he had his marketing department within the athletic department search and search and search what makes Nebraska distinct from everybody else. And really, they could find nothing, absolutely nothing, except for 2 years, they had hired Boyd Epley. He was the first paid strength coach at the Division I level. And that's what made them distinct. Understanding the economies of recruiting, Billy Devaney went with it. And they sold their strength program and they sold Boyd Epley, and they did a marvelous job with it. So much so that even today, when you go to a strength conference and somebody drops the University of Nebraska
name, power,
it's like a hush falls over the room. And so in February, after winning the second national championship, Billy Devaney came out in public and said something that forever changed the trajectory of strength training in the United States. He said, the reason why we win national championships at the University of Nebraska is our kids are stronger than their kids.
And everybody's been playing keep up ever since, huh?
Yeah, and it was a lie because none of his starters lifted. But being the national championship coach, when you make a statement like that in a copycat profession, that holds a lot of weight. So like you said, Logan, people are playing catch up now. They want to level the playing field. Weight rooms started popping up across college campuses all across the United States, which is a good thing. But the bad thing was what happened next. Where did the football coaches go to hire and get their strength professionals? Did they turn around to their academic departments of kinesiology and sports physiology and go to the department heads and say, who are your brightest minds that can coach and teach this to my players? Did they go to the scientists?
Probably not.
No, they did not. They did not. I hate to say it, but one university did. Being an Ohio State grad, I hate to admit it, but Bo Schembechler at the University of Michigan went to their department chair and say, who's your brightest mind that can coach and teach us to my players? And he gave them Mike Gittleson's name. And Mike Gittleson, a mentor of mine, was at the University of Michigan for 27 very successful years running a science-based program. And the only ones in the country. Everybody else, they went to Venice Beach. And if you looked like Arnold, or you bench pressed 400 pounds, or you cleaned 400 pounds, that in itself gave you professional credibility. So if your head strength coach hired a bodybuilder, you're doing multi-set free weight split body routines. If he hired a power lifter, you're benching, you're squatting, you're deadlifting. If your coach hired an Olympic weightlifter, you're cleaning and snatching. You see, because to a hammer, everything's a nail. So when people ask me about the current state of affairs of strength training in the United States, I'm not surprised to see that we have a blend of bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic weightlifting protocols. I mean, those were our first experts, so that set the trend for where we are today. In fact, there's very little evidence-based, scientific-based strength programs. So that's kind of a overarching history type of thing of where we are. I think I mentioned at the rec, maybe I didn't. I used to call the strength profession a profession, but at this point, I think most of the pros are out of it. And so to me, we have a fashion more than anything right now.
Fashion industry. Well, honestly, Coach Asanovich, it doesn't sound too different in the 70s and 80s to what it is today, right? Any person that initially walks into the gym or follows somebody on Instagram, they're looking at the person who's got the biggest muscles. And as we both know, and as you probably know better than the average person, having big muscles does not make you an expert on anything regarding strength and conditioning. And oftentimes, now this is obviously, just a generalization, but sometimes the people with the best physiques have the least understanding of what actually makes proper, safe, effective resistance training. This is something I try to drive home to our listeners, and we've talked about multiple times on this podcast, is looking to athletes, as you know, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this, as sort of the epitome of what performance could be and what the results of your resistance training program could look like, is a useless endeavor, right? We're talking about the absolute genetic lottery winners among lottery winners. I mean, when you're looking at these high level athletes, we see stuff all the time. I think somebody's maybe mentioned Dr. Joel Seedman to you before, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I see plenty of people who are doing things like this where they're alleging that there's this skill transfer that happens, that they can show specific athletic abilities and improve athleticism with athletes, disregarding the fact that every person that they're working with is a Division I or a professional athlete. And as you know, and again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, take somebody off the street and try to teach them a complex skill, and it's probably not going to go very well. But take somebody who's got the potential to be a Division I running back or NFL level tight end or receiver or quarterback, and they're probably wired pretty well to do those skills. Any thoughts on those things?
Well, if you take a look at these genetic phenotypes that are the outliers that, as you say, hit the lottery, in fact, they are successful not because usually of their training approaches, they're successful in spite of their training approaches because they have those genetic gifts. I've trained 13 Hall of Famers to date, NFL Hall of Famers, and I could have done everything wrong with Derek Brooks, and I didn't, but I could have, and he'd still be in the Hall of Fame today because he is one of those genetic outliers. But yeah, to look to the genetic outliers to get information on training, it just doesn't work. In fact, a lot of these NFL players will go into training because they don't have any academic degrees after they get out of the NFL. And a lot of my guys are, and they're calling me to ask questions as far as what to do.
Well, maybe that's a good thing. If they used to work with you and now they're trying to teach other people, you can give them some good information. What I always like to say is, don't look at LeBron James and see what's effective for him because, like you said, he's probably successful in spite of some of the dumb things he's doing. Look at what would work for LeBron James' grandmother, right? What would work for somebody who's elderly that's going to get them results as opposed to somebody who's a freak athlete that, like you mentioned, could pretty much do anything, even the wrong things, and still have these incredible outcomes. I think coaches like you specifically are probably, at least in part, and I know you would probably never take credit for this, but helping a guy like Derek Brooks stay healthy, right? And that's one of the often overlooked things, one of the often overlooked and probably the most important roles of a true strength and conditioning coach is safety, is injury prevention, is doing whatever you can to keep your first string athletes on the field as long as possible and keep them as safe as possible. Let's dive in a little just from practical application. What can our listeners do? I'd love for you to talk about your 5 P's of resistance training. Now, I'm going to give them a little bit away here because I know you're going to dive in more into detail, but they're prudent, productive, practical, purposeful, and the new one, politically correct. So why don't you walk us through each of those and talk to us in a little more detail about proper resistance training programs?
Well, the first P is and you already hit on it. It is the epitome why strength coaches are strength coaches, because exercise needs to be prudent first and foremost. Meaning, when you are prescribing exercise, there's 2 questions that you're asking yourself. You're asking, is the exercise safe? And is the exercise sound? And if it is, then you can prescribe it. If it isn't, you shouldn't prescribe it. Exercise should enhance health. Never should it endanger health. When you're taking a look at safe exercise, for example, putting somebody on a physio ball to do a dumbbell press, as opposed to putting them on a stable bench to do that, you always have to choose the safer alternative. And then as far as, is it sound? Something that's sound has to do with industry best practices. And when you're looking at industry best practices, you're looking at the highest quality of service that can be provided. And in order to do that, it has to satisfy 3 or 4 criteria. The first criteria is it has to satisfy the preponderance of prospective evidence, meaning it has to reflect the highest quality of research. The second is expert consensus. What are the experts in the industry saying in regards to that practice? And then the third, there's 3 criteria. The third is collateral liability, in the fact that what possible risks are inherent to doing that practice. So if it's supported by the preponderance of evidence, if it's supported by expert consensus, and if it's not dangerous and doesn't have a high risk, then the exercise is probably sound. And that's the kind of exercise you prescribe. If it's not safe, if it's not sound. A lot of times I hear strength coaches talk at conferences, risk-benefit ratio. That may apply to playing sports. When we do sports, there's an inherent risk of injury, and that's accepted by every athlete. But there should never, ever be an acceptance of risk when you train for sport. Training for sport isn't sport, and there should never be risk. If somebody endangers somebody in the weight room, that is criminal malpractice, simply said. And you don't hurt people in the weight room. You do everything you can to help people. I think the comment I made at the rec is, first and foremost, strength coaches, like law enforcement, are there to serve and protect. Strength coaches' first and foremost job is to protect players from the rigors of sport. Now, it's interesting, a lot of times when you talk like this, I've heard football coaches go, well, you run one of those injury prevention programs, meaning inferring that it has nothing to do with performance. And they're one and the same thing. By training the musculature of the body, there's collateral adaptations, meaning the tendons and ligaments get stronger. The bones become thicker and denser. The collagen capsule around the joint becomes thicker, and joints become more structurally sound with strength training. As a result, they are more resilient to injury because the structural integrity of the joint is so much greater. But at the same time, by increasing the strength of joints, you increase the potential power output in the joint as well. Power is defined as force, and strength is defined as force. So power is defined as force times distance over time. So as you get the muscle stronger, the potential to perform also increases. So it's one and the same thing if it's done properly. And Logan, you hit the nail on the head when you said that keeping your starters on the field from getting injured, that's the whole deal in professional sports, in really any sport. If you can keep your starters on the field, you have a much better chance of being successful than if your starting quarterback goes down and now you're going for your second or your third string athlete at that point. So by keeping them injury free, you are at the same time increasing performance.
And I think this is so applicable to just the average person too, right? The little aside there, I think unless you're the San Francisco 49ers and you happen to draft Brock Purdy and he's your fourth string quarterback or whatever it is, right? And still plays well. But no, in all seriousness, for the average individual, staying safe in your training is so important, right? There's no reason if you're
Everything.
a recreational runner, that you should injure yourself because you're trying to imitate something from a power perspective that you saw on Instagram, right? The safest thing you should do, and I couldn't agree more with this, is your resistance training, is building the foundation that's going to make you better at whatever activity it is that you're passionate about, whether you're Tom Brady or you're just a weekend warrior and you're doing, some kind of Spartan race or whatever it might be. Now, those might be inherently dangerous, but we can build you up to make sure you're as bulletproof, if you want to use that terminology, as possible. Prudent for sure. Make sure it's safe. Make sure it's sound. I just love the idea of the prehab is a big term that gets thrown around now. And I think prehabilitation and combining those things together with safe, sound, prudent exercise is probably the best way to approach exercise in general. Let's talk about the next piece. How do we make exercise as productive as possible?
Well, contrary to popular opinion, a lot of people think that there are secrets when it comes to productive exercise, or they think that it is complicated. And it's not complicated to understand. It's not hard to understand. When you take a look at the scientific formula for increasing strength and or size, you're talking a look at combining aggressive resistance exercise with a nutritious diet, with rest and recovery, and with common sense. So it comes down to training right, eating right, sleeping right, and living right. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science to understand that if you want maximal results, you must put in maximal effort. If you want maximal results, you must consume the appropriate nutrients to give your body. If you want maximum results, you have to get your body 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night, and you have to make the right choices when it comes to your body as it responds to exercise. If you're tired, you may have to give yourself a little bit more rest. Again, it's very simple to understand, but it ain't simple to do. It's not simple training hard. It's not simple squeezing out that last 1 or 2 repetitions when your body is yelling at you to shut down. It's not simple to discipline yourself at the table every single meal to give yourself the proper nutrients. It's not simple getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. So again, it's simple to understand. It's not simple to do.
Yeah, and again, I think as you probably know, we live in a society that's looking for that quick fix, for that silver bullet, and that's just not the case, especially with what we're talking about here. I think one of the easiest ways to recognize charlatans in our industry is anybody who promises to have some sort of secret sauce, some kind of secret elixir. Do things my proprietary way, and you'll get the results you've always dreamed of. And half the time, right? If they're saying that you have to put in less work and you're going to get more results, obviously, within reason, they're probably selling you snake oil, right? It's a good rule of thumb to live by. Now, obviously not always the case, but people who have secrets, like you said, and try to overcomplicate these things tend to be trying to sell you something that's more complex than it actually needs to be. Let's talk about practical resistance training. What does that look like to you?
When you're talking about practical, you're talking about economies of time. And unfortunately, in the fitness industry, the paradigm of more is better has always dominated. And because of that, people have the misperception that you need to be training, particularly when it comes to resistance exercise, in the gym for high volumes of time, 2 hours, 3 hours, like a lot of these people do. And really what you should be asking yourself is, how can I get the optimum results from putting in the least amount of time? And clearly there's, the research has shown us that if you increase the intensity of exercise, by definition, you have to decrease the frequency and the duration of the exercise. You can train hard or you can train long. You can't train hard long. And it's the hard where you get the most benefits. I tell people all the time that if they go through what I take my clients through in 15 or 30 minutes, and we do that for 2 hours, they're carrying those people out in caskets. You can't work hard long. And I had an athlete when I was with the Buccaneers. He was signed as a free agent. His name was Keyshawn Johnson.
I know the name.
Yeah, Keyshawn was a wide receiver, and he took a lot of pride in his body and his training. So the first time I met him in the weight room, he came in and he said, "Coach, I want you to know that I train 2 hours every day." And he was somewhat taken aback because I said, "Well, you ain't training hard then, Keyshawn." And he looked at me and said, "You can't train hard long." And so we always like to have our athletes in the off season in Tampa so we could personally train them and get the most out of their results. But every now and then we would have a starting athlete that lived away from us. And Keyshawn, he lived in Los Angeles, did not want to be in Tampa. So we had a couple guys like that. So when we did, I would fly out to wherever they lived to take a look at how they were being trained and who was training them, and making sure that we were good on our investment, that he wasn't going to get hurt as a result of his training, which would then predispose him to injury, and we would not have his talents for the season. So when I flew out to Los Angeles, and he was very gracious to have me come out to his house and stuff like that. And what I did is I brought a stopwatch with me. And when I went in and watched him train, I would put my stopwatch on. And when he stopped his set, then I would stop it. So I was timing his total workout.
I have a feeling I know where this story is going, Mark.
Yeah, he had a beautiful facility in his weight room. It looks very similar to my garage right now. And he had a lot of very good tools. And so I said, Keyshawn, just, this was a Saturday morning, just take me through your normal workout routine. And for 2 hours, we were in there. We were in there. But when I looked at my stopwatch at the end, it said 32 minutes. Okay. And he, to his credit, actually trained really hard. But the other times, the other hour and a half, he's on his cell phone. He's going out and getting a drink, talking to his kids, doing all that stuff. Physically, he was in the weight room for 2 hours, but really he was working out for 32 minutes. So again, you can work hard or you can work long, but you can't work hard, which gets you the best results, long.
Yeah, and I love that anecdote, and I think again it just brings me back to the people that most people are getting their information from, right? As influencers, it's celebrity fitness people, right? I always think of somebody like The Rock always makes me, I love watching his motivational stuff. He had one the other day. It's like he's up at 2 a.m. He looks amazing. He's got his tank top on. And then I have to take a step back and realize, yeah, he's working out for an hour. He's also juiced to the gills. His job is to be the biggest man on the planet. Like, yeah, you could probably get away with it if you're The Rock, right? And you've got some other enhancements going on as well. But if you're a busy mother of two, if you're a trial attorney, if you're just a young kid who wants to spend more time with his friends than in the gym, putting in that purposeful effort, like you talked about, that practical effort, which brings us right to our next P, which I alluded to there, is purposeful. How do we make our exercise purposeful?
Well, you have to ask yourself what the purpose of exercise is. Actually, when I ask strength coaches that question, they're saying, well, the purpose of resistance exercise is to get stronger. It's to increase energy metabolism. It's to increase bone mineral density. And they go on and on and on. And in fact, that's not the purpose of exercise. That's the outcome of exercise. To understand the purpose, you've got to go a little deeper because the purpose of all exercise is to stimulate an adaptive response, physiological response. That's the purpose of exercise. So when I evaluate exercise, my first question to the person who prescribed it is, what is the physiological intent of this act? What's the adaptation? What's happening at the cellular level that that's making you do this type of exercise? Which is kind of interesting because we're talking about current day status. When you talk about exercise on TV today, what's always portrayed is this person doing battle ropes or flipping a tire. And my first question is, what is the physiological intent of doing that? And usually when I ask a strength coach that, they look at me like I got 9 heads. But if one were to say, well, we do battle ropes to enhance the strength of the anterior deltoid. Well, God bless him. At least he has a reason for doing that. But my next question then to him would be, is there a safer way to do that exercise? You've got the purpose, but now is there a safer way? And that's what we need strength coaches to start doing. Getting back to purposeful exercise. If the intent of exercise is to stimulate a physiological response, now we have to take a look at, well, what's the optimal stimulus that will get us the safest? Okay, so the stimulus should be prudent. It should be productive. It should be practical, and it should give the optimum results. So when you're talking about the ultimate stimulus with exercise, you're looking at intensity, and intelligence, effort and execution, giving great effort. We talk about that all the time, but we don't seldom talk about the execution, doing great rep mechanics, making sure you're lifting under control, eliminating momentum, making sure you're getting appropriate range of motion, that you are breathing, that you are flexing or pausing in the fully contracted position. Those are the ultimate optimum stimuluses that are going to give you optimal results.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's important here too to point out, you talked about the battle ropes. I think that's a great example. I think a lot of times what gets lost on coaches and trainers in general is they mix up the value to the client, right? They think that because people are exposed to those things, they see the battle ropes on TV, that that's what they want. And they lose sight of the fact that no, what they actually want is positive outcomes. They want to look better. They want those adaptations. They want the stronger deltoids, but they don't know how to articulate that because they're not well versed in exercise physiology, right? So it's not our job as coaches to give people what they want from a technique and different tool perspective. It's to deliver results that work, and using all these tools you're talking about, these 5 Ps, delivering purposeful exercise that actually targets the thing that they want, which is adaptation, increases in metabolism, stronger bones, stronger muscles. All of those things are possible with smart, safe, effective exercise. But it's just so easy to get caught up in, no, I have to do what everybody else is doing. Otherwise, they'll leave. And what I would say to that is, no, if you're delivering results, people are going to stay with you. They don't care what you're doing, right? They want the outcomes. They don't know how they're supposed to get there. They're coming to you as a guide. And if you can give them results, they will stay. I mean, that is the number one retention tool on the planet, bar none, is give people the results that they're after, and they're going to be raving fans of your product, your service, whatever it might be. Is there anything else you would add to that before we go into this last P?
Well, yeah, I think Kim Wood said it best when he talked about purposeful exercise. He always would say that strength training is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself, meaning we're there not to create power lifters or Olympic weightlifters. We're there to maximize the talents and to make injury resilient athletes and injury resilient and healthy clients. We're not there to make, our end is not the 1 rep max. Our end are all the things that we talked about, increase in strength, bone mineral density, energy metabolism, increasing tendon and ligamentous strength. That's what our outcome, that's what we're looking for. That's our purpose, not the 1 RM.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up looking at this last P of the 5 Ps of resistance training. The newest edition, politically correct. How does that factor into our resistance training programming?
Well, for years, I had 4 Ps of strength training: prudent, productive, practical, and purposeful. But as the industry has become more pseudo-scientific, as people have gotten more into the commercially biased, hocus pocus fitness trends that come and go, I had to add a 5th P, and that is being politically correct. In other words, meaning that as professionals, we have to deceive to achieve, meaning we have to give them what they want in a way that we want to give it. Because, as you alluded to, the general populace aren't educated as to physiology. They will see what's hyped on TV or in the magazines. And what we have to do as professionals sometime is take some of those gimmicks, but do it in a way that is purposeful, that is prudent, that is productive. Because the general populace tends to gravitate towards the sexy. Okay, the sexy would be a battle rope, would be flipping a tire. What I have to sell my clients in my garage is basic, brutally hard, brief exercise. That ain't sexy. And that generally doesn't sell in the marketplace. So how can you make yourself relevant to the general populace that's expecting all these gimmicks? Well, you can be politically correct by using some of these things to appear relevant. So an example I gave at the rec was when I was with the Jaguars, we introduced a band, and we came up with a protocol on our hammer machines where we would attach a band to the work arm and then attach it to a plate arm to add resistance to the exercise. And they would do 8 repetitions with the bands on. We'd take the bands off, and they would do 8 repetitions with the bands off. Well, when we introduced the bands, the next thing you know, players are telling me in the locker room, people are calling us fitness geniuses, gurus, cutting edge. And, again, your muscle doesn't have eyeballs, so it didn't know what was providing the resistance. But in their minds, we were now relevant. Another thing we added was physio balls. And I think we ordered 10 physio balls, and we hung them on the wall. And literally, we had to dust them off because we used them so infrequently. But when they were hanging there, I called them eye candy. We were perceived as cutting edge, scientific gurus. So it's unfortunate that we're in that situation right now, but we can't be naive to think that if you don't do some of that stuff, you will be perceived as a dinosaur, as somebody who's not current, who's no longer relevant. So that's kind of, Logan, where the 5th P came through.
Yeah, and this is something I've certainly noticed as we've transitioned into virtual training in our own company. And as we get clients who've been purchasing things over the years from a variety of different sources, whether it's different types of resistance bands or physio balls, and my job is never to downgrade the tools somebody has. And instead, how can we incorporate those? How can we bring those bands into play in those virtual workouts that they're maybe doing at home? And then in the meantime, as I'm hoping to get results using them to the best of my ability, with whatever practical applications I can come up that follow the rest of these rules, the rest of these Ps, I'm also educating them on why maybe they should get an actual set of dumbbells as well, right? Why they might want some power blocks or something like an adjustable bench that I know to be safe and to be productive and to assist with purposeful exercise. So I couldn't agree more. I think it's so easy to see some dumb things that we would maybe consider impractical, not purposeful. Yeah, not prudent, not purposeful, like the opposite of all the P's. But instead of pushing someone away and saying, no, that's dumb, you shouldn't do that, how can we bring them into the fold? How can we say, yeah, we're going to use this tool that you have, and we're going to use it in a way that's safe and effective, and I'm going to give you a great workout, regardless of what the tool is. And having that ability to educate people and to be on their side and to show them, hey, we can use this in the right way. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue to educate you on what might be a better tool in the future. I think that's how it has to be done, because otherwise we're just going to get overrun with all these tools, and we will in fact be dinosaurs, you and me both, Mark.
And it's a process because, like you said, as they see the results and as they are educated, you can use less and less of those gimmicks. But it's a process. It's forming those relationships and giving them what they want in a way that you want.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners who maybe have not started this style of training, who maybe haven't done something like high intensity training in the past, asking yourself, does your workout look like this? Is it prudent? Is it productive? Is it practical? Does it make sense for somebody who's a busy individual? Are you actually doing it with purpose? And are you just following along with gimmicks? Or are you actually being politically correct and using tools appropriately? So, Mark, I'd love to share any closing thoughts you might have. I think this was super helpful. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of it. Anything else you'd like to leave us with before I let you go today?
Well, just kind of going back to what we were talking about with, where do you go to find information and experts and stuff like that? And I'm sure you've heard this story. Arthur Jones would always say that One thing you can do is you can go to the gym, seek out the largest individual in the gym, spend the day with that individual, take copious notes of what that individual does, go home that night and commit those notes to memory, and then go in the gym the next day and do the exact opposite. And so, what I want to leave you today is when you're looking for experts, don't look to the outliers. Look to the exercise physiologists, the scientists, because that's where you're going to get the best results in the least amount of time and in the safest way using all 5 Ps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I really appreciate you taking the time today, Coach. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like and subscribe. Share this episode with anybody in your life who's maybe not practicing the 5 Ps of resistance training and could benefit from learning a thing or two from a coaching great. And again, if you're in the Minnesota area, check out Pro Pumped. Google Mark, learn more about him. And thank you again so much for taking the time today, sir. I really appreciate it.
Real fan of the podcast, Logan. You do a great job. Honored to be here.
Thank you very much, sir. Good to have you. Thanks, everyone.